Alright, so hello one and all, welcome back to another Mushoku Tensei episode review where I go over the anime, manga, and light novel to talk about everything that the anime covered and everything that it skipped. So today we're going over the OVA of Season 1, also known as basically just episode 24 I guess, called Eris the Goblin Slayer. And so this doesn't have a manga adaptation as far as I know, so I'll just be covering the light novel, and so let's get into it. At the time, Cliff was 12. He's a year older than Rudius, but a year younger than Eris. As a kid, he was raised in an orphanage in Militian that was controlled by the Milish Church and served as its symbol of power. Because of this, it was well funded, and the children there were taken care of quite well, and many were adopted. And by the age of 5, Cliff was adopted by a man named Harry Grimoir, an elderly man who held a high rank in the Milish Church. After his adoption, Cliff had gone under much training to nurture his talents, and in only a few short years he was an advanced rank magician in healing, detoxification, and divine strike magic. He was also an intermediate rank in water, earth, and wind magic, and was also advanced rank in fire magic. Cliff was simply a prodigy, and everybody around him showered him with praise. His early years were much like Rudius's, but unlike Rudius, he didn't have his past life to allow himself to stay humble, and so Cliff became arrogant and soon surpassed his tutors and stopped listening to them. One day, Cliff was expected to succeed his foster father and take on the position in the Milish Church. Although Cliff understood that, at the moment he just wished to be an adventurer. The reason why is because those who never got adopted into the orphanage would be trained to become swordsmen and magicians. After they graduated, some would become knights, if they could do swordplay and magic anyway, while many of them simply went on to become adventurers. And those who have already grown up sometimes visit the orphanage to catch up on the tutors and teachers and tell exciting stories about the adventures that they've been on. This got not only the other kids interested in adventuring, but obviously Cliff was as well. But Cliff was adopted, so he couldn't choose his future. He understood this, and he knew that his dream would never come true, but he still wanted to prove his skills. And so, with the staff that his foster father gave him for his 10th birthday, he snuck out, went from the Divine District to the Adventurers Guild, and bought a blue magician's robe. He then went to the Adventurers Guild and signed up as an adventurer. He put his profession as magician instead of healer, because he thought that the church would quickly track him down, if that would have even made any difference. Healers and magicians are basically the same thing, but you know, kids, right? They're stupid. But now Cliff was an official adventurer and his heart thrummed with excitement. Looking around the room, he saw a bunch of muscular men and went up to one of them to ask if he could join their party. But he got rejected. He tried again and again and again until he started a fight with the 4th guy he went up to, and that's where Eris appeared. But before we continue, let's backtrack to see how Eris ended up in that Adventurers Guild. Heading back to this morning, Eris had parted ways from Rudius and Ruijerd so she could visit the Adventurers Guild. But now remember, Ruijerd isn't tailing Eris like he did in the anime. Again, for more details, go check out the episode 18 review, but Ruijerd is actually visiting a friend. Yes, he has a friend. It's kind of crazy. His name is Galgard Nash Vennick, which is a pretty, it's definitely a name, that's for sure. But Eris wanted to go towards the Adventurers Guild because she wanted to slay some goblins. And so Eris wore her regular adventurer's getup, but omitted the cat ear hood because she realized that it often got her mistaken as a magician. And thus, she had a bunch of annoying people walk up to her and ask for her to join their party. But then Eris soon arrived at the Adventurers Guild, and since it was the headquarters of the entire organization, it was the single largest building in the district. Its size, however, wasn't enough to intimidate Eris, and so she strode right on inside. But upon entering, the lobby itself was bigger than any other guilds that she had seen so far, and was even larger than the banquet hall in her family's mansion in Roa. Eris paused only for a second, because anyone would, before she made a beeline for the job board, which was much bigger than any other that she'd seen and was overflowing with postings. Normally, Dead End would take on B-rank quests, but Eris was looking at the E-ranked ones for any open quests. Those were quests that were posted by the country that the guild was located in and was open to anyone to complete, no matter your rank. Since the Demon Continent didn't really have countries, I guess, these postings just didn't exist over there. But Eris eventually landed on a quest. Task: exterminate goblins. Reward: 10 mils copper coins per ear. Details: help cull the local goblin population. Location: east of Militian. Duration: none/deadline none. Client: the Holy Knights of Milis. Notes: New adventurers should be wary of hobgoblins, which are sometimes found among groups of goblins. Do not remove this quest from the board, simply bring the ears you collect directly to the front counter. So goblins were like humanoid monsters that didn't really understand human speech and used cruel weapons. They were mostly located in boundaries between forests and open plains, and while they were like mostly harmless in small numbers, if they were left alone for too long, they would rapidly reproduce and attack nearby villages. On one hand, they were a slightly dangerous pest, but they were also a natural buffer against the more dangerous monsters that spawned in the forests. I guess like there's a whole ecosystem when it comes to monsters now that I think about it, right? You know how like every bug and every animal is important, right? Even like, I guess mosquitoes and wasps really aren't important, but like even like stupid dumb ants and ugly spiders are important for their own reasons. And I guess no matter how much of a pest they are, you know, again, they're important, and I guess goblins are the same way. So I would love just for like Rifujin Namaganote, the author, he loves to go into like these whole rants about like lore about the world and this and that. I would love for him to just go into a whole spiel about the ecosystem of some of the lands. I would love to know like what monsters are keeping the other monsters at bay, and what do these monsters do anything good for the environment, or what? Like if you were to remove all monsters, would stuff start to like go a little bit like hectic? That'd be interesting. Author, do that. I know you're not watching this, but do that for the sequel. I want more. I want to know more about the monsters. But anyway, goblins could be killed by basically like anyone who knew how to use the sword, and so the Adventurers Guild took advantage of that and used quests like these as like a sort of introduction to combat quests. Goblins did, however, serve another purpose aside from being a good beginner's quest, and that was that they were sometimes used as a torture device against foreign spies, and so the Holy Country Milice never wanted the goblins within their borders to be exterminated, but just kept at a stable level. Again, it's stuff like this that's very interesting. Goblins are used for beginner's quests in torture methods, like, I don't know, what other monsters are used? That's another question, right? Are there any practical human uses to having monsters, right? There's the giant lizards, right, in the demon continents. That's probably a monster, right? Maybe? Or maybe that's just a lizard dragon. I don't know. But God, I want to know more about the monsters in the area. Despite Eris, who is a recognized A-rank adventurer by Ruijerd, who's easily able to perform C-rank quests on her own, she wanted to do this goblin-slaying E-rank quest for two reasons. Back when she went to school for a brief period of time, she often listened in on a group of boys in her class where they were always talking about what they do when they become adventurers, and they'd start off with killing goblins. After they rise the ranks and earned enough money, they'd go down to the southern regions of the central continent and take on high-rank jobs and dive into labyrinths. Being enthralled by their fantasies, Eris started to indulge in those same fantasies. One day she walked over to the group to strike up a conversation which somehow led into a fight that got her expelled. However, she soon met Ghislaine, who interested her even more into becoming an adventurer. On top of all of that, when she met Rudius, she had always daydreamed about becoming an adventurer with him. In her mind, they'd form a party of two, Eris the swordswoman and Rudius the mage. Together, they'd challenge the unknown labyrinths in search of treasure. However, the reality of it, when they were actually transported to the demon continent, was quite different from what she had imagined. Rudius acted all business-like, and while Eris wanted to explore labyrinths to get into danger, Rudius wanted to keep them out of danger. She figured that if she were to bring up the idea of killing goblins, that Rudius would just raise an eyebrow and go like, why would we ever bother doing that? At this point, Eris is not a rookie, not by a long shot, but she still wanted to fulfill that dream that she had as a kid of slaying a bunch of goblins. It was always the top of her things I want to do once I became an adventurer list. That was her first reason. The second one, at this time of the story, is kept a secret. However, if you watched my episode 22 review, we know that in the light novel, it actually revealed it. And if you didn't watch the episode 22 review, look, I know I'm saying that a lot, but like that was a big one. You really got to know Eris in that. In what they cut out Eris's entire character. And like Eris has like anxiety and panic attacks over the past 3 years of trying to get back to Fidoa, and it really gives us a deeper understanding of like how she felt. But speaking of those anxieties and doubts in her mind, the second reason was revealed that she wanted to prove to herself that she could actually do something by herself. She wanted to slay the simplest of creatures, goblins. And as we know, she does like So much more than just kill goblins that day. But up until this point, Eris had many doubts of her usefulness on the team, and was convinced that Rudius had hated her. Like, which is kind of crazy. Like, you don't get that vibe from the anime. But the events of this day gave her a lot more confidence, and she was able to prove her strength to herself. But anyway, despite it only being morning, Eris was a little worried about getting home before sunset. And as she was thinking this over, she noticed a posting on the very edge of the board near the F rank quests. It read, "Displaced citizens of the Fidoa region, please contact the following address." After reading the first line, Eris already knew what this note was. It was the same one that she found in Zanport's Adventurers Guild. Rudius never spoke of the Fidoa region, and she had just assumed that it was because Rudius didn't want her to be anxious, and suspected that the reason why he called off this off day was to deal with it. Eris tried not to think about such complicated problems, and had convinced herself that she wasn't smart enough to understand them. After all, she had Rudius to do all the thinking for her. And that's a really sad thing to hear. Like, oh my god. It's very similar with Ghislaine, we found out, like, some time ago. But when the time came, Eris was sure that he would be able to explain everything to her in a way that she would understand. But Eris would never have dreamed that Rudius wasn't even aware of the existence of the notes. So, whoops, I guess she might have, it might have been good to fill Rudius in on these notes. It might have saved a lot of trouble. But with that, Eris walked away from the job board, ready to leave to slay some goblins, when she overhears Cliff arguing with some men. She noticed that Cliff must be a magician, considering his blue robe. Despite being older than Rudius, Cliff was shorter than him and had dark brown hair that covered his eyes. The staff that he held wasn't quite as impressive as Rudius's Aquahardia, but you could tell by the size of the crystal that it was made from good materials. His family was likely well off, but not as wealthy as Eris's. Overhearing what Cliff was saying, all Eris could think of is if he said that to her, he would be on the floor. Eventually, Eris walks over to the man and tells him that he's being childish. And if Rudius were here, his jaw would be on the floor, because he would not have expected, like, you wouldn't expect Eris to say anything like that. And the truth is, Eris found this whole situation quite thrilling. She was the veteran stepping in to protect the newbie from some bullies. However, hearing Eris, the man said, "I guess you're right," and then he left. It was a little bit anticlimactic, but Eris imagined what Cliff would say. "Thank you for helping me, miss. Who are you?" "Oh, I'm no one special. Please tell me your name." Alright. "You can call me Dead End Rougerd then." She heard Rudius use that line before and wanted to try it out herself, but then Cliff snapped at her, called her ugly, and, like she said, he was on the floor. She kept wailing on him until, like, the guys that she, like, told off came to pull her off of Cliff. If they didn't do that, it stated that Eris would have ripped off Cliff's, his little member. And that thing is a very important part of Cliff's character, and I'm not joking about that. Why am I not joking about that? His penis is very important. But thanks to that, Eris's mood was somewhat lousy now. It was only somewhat because Cliff had bowed his head and apologized to her. Cliff introduces himself, and Eris is about to say that she's Dead End Rougerd, but it might not be too appropriate to promote it when she's just, like, beat up a kid, so she gives Cliff her real name. The conversation goes how it does in the anime, nothing really to comment on, and when Cliff burns the bodies and ears of the goblins with Exodus Flame, Eris couldn't help but compare him to Rudius. Unlike Rudius, Cliff had to rattle off some incantation and his flames were much weaker. On top of that, Rudius wouldn't go overboard on an enemy like that, resulting in the destruction of their ears. What's more is that Eris had kept the goblins occupied until Cliff finished the incantation and didn't even warn her that it was finished, so she had to dodge out of the way of his attack. Rudius would never have made such a dangerous blunder. But from there, Cliff explains to Eris about magic, which she already knew from a better teacher at that. And Cliff accidentally mocks Eris, she punches him, and then he challenges her, asking if she's scared to go into the forest. The only reason why she was hesitant to go into the forest is because this is something that both Rougerd and Rudius said to her. Like, forests are dangerous no matter who you are, and plus, once it gets to nighttime, like, you can get lost in a dark forest, and it's generally not a good time. And so she trusted their judgment completely. Now, with them in the forest, there are monkey-like creatures called Utan. A Nutan is a D-rank monster which is far more dangerous than a goblin, but it's still fodder compared to Eris. Exploring the forest for a bit, she realizes that Millis's woods are actually pretty tame. And then it also hit her. They were lost. She thought back to what Rudius, Ruijerd, or Ghislaine would do in the situation. She could start a fire to create smoke so someone could find her, but it would be embarrassing to explain the situation to like Rudius. And so she tells Cliff to just fly up and see where the city is, but he says that's impossible. But of course, Rudius can do that. Eris then suggests that there's probably other adventurers in the forest, and upon hearing that, Cliff goes to run off to look for them, but Eris stays put. Ruijerd said to never move in this kind of situation. He told her to stay still and sharpen her senses. Eris didn't have a third eye like a Superd, but she had her ears and nose and could feel the flow of mana in the area. She was still inexperienced in many ways, but she trained every single day for moments like these. Eris closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and emptied her mind. Hearing the sounds around her, the branches, monsters, insects, she picked up on the sounds of combat in the distance. And something I'd like to note is like, yeah, I guess there's like, you know, you can sense their like people's chakra or like ki, or I guess in this case mana. Very interesting. I don't know if there's many practical applications for that that we'll see in the future at all, but I do like the idea that you can just like sense people's energy just by like closing your eyes. That's pretty cool. But anyway, she and Cliff made their way over to the Sound to find a temple knight surrounded by 5 assassins in black-clad clothing as the knight tries to protect a girl from behind her. Cliff explains that the temple knight, who is Therese, is protecting a blessed child, a Miko. The Miko is one day said to become the next pope, and the men in black are the current pope's personal assassins. We'll find a bit why the people of the current pope are attacking someone who sounds like they'd be on the same side in a bit, but for now we get a little bit of detail on the 3 different knights of Millis. There's the Cathedral Knights, who wore white. They dealt with matters of national defense. Then the Missionary Knights, who wore silver, and they were dispatched abroad as mercenaries to spread the teachings of the Millis Church and to demonstrate its power. And then there were the cerulean-colored Temple Knights. They were much more feared and infamous inquisitors and crushed any heresy that they could find. Eris then leaped out from the bushes and used an advanced tier sword god style technique called Silent Sword, much like how Paul's water god style technique was an advanced tiers versions of Orsted's water god style's technique flow. That was a sentence. Eris's Silent Sword was an advanced tier version of Ghislaine's king tier secret technique, Sword of Light. She cut one assassin from his shoulder diagonally through his rib cage. This was the first time that Eris had ever killed someone, but she didn't falter for even a moment because her focus had already shifted onto her next target. After killing him, the 3 remaining men had time to encircle her as the 2 of them charged forward. Therese warned Eris about the poison daggers, and thanks to that, Eris was able to reevaluate the situation and act accordingly. Killing the 3rd assassin, she was able to break free from the circle, and then the 2 decide to make a run for it before Eris kills one of them, but unfortunately, she lets one of them go. With a small snort of disdain, Eris flicked her sword to throw the blood and guts off of the blade, and from the outside, Eris seemed as stoic as ever, but on the inside, she was kind of freaking out. This was the first time that she had ever been in a true life or death situation with a human, and this was the first time that she had ever killed someone. On top of that, her opponents had poison daggers, and so one hit from them could have proved fatal. She had no backup, no Rudius, no Ruijerd. One mistake could have costed Eris's life. Keeping these thoughts to herself, Eris apologizes for letting one of them run away, and Therese is kind of just left dumbfounded. Eris is still just an early teen, but she was able to do all of that, but she still apologized. Baffling. But also, again, we really get to see Eris's character, right? She may seem all stoic and whatever on the outside, but what the anime skips is her inner monologue. And sometimes, anime adaptations don't really need that inner monologue of the characters, but in cases like this where it's 2 polar opposites, right? Eris seems so very stoic and the classic warrior image, but on the inside she's oh my god, I just killed someone. Oh god, I could have died. Oh my god, I'm freaking out, right? That doesn't seem like Eris. But Therese then introduces herself, and Eris introduces herself as Dead End Ruijerd. And she was like, hey, believe it or not, I'm actually a Superd. But what Eris didn't know is how much of a fanatic that the Temple Knights were, Therese included. And she would have performed battle with her even if Therese knew that she would lose against Eris. but upon one glance, Therese knew that Eris wasn't a super, and it was likely just saying that because she didn't have any interest in any further involvement in the situation. In other words, she didn't expect a reward despite saving someone of great importance. Therese found that pleasantly surprising, but Therese then whistled as a horse came running from the forest after it ran away after their carriage got toppled over. Therese and the Miko left as Therese says that if she ever needs assistance, just ask Therese of the Temple Knights. There was a lot of Thereses in that sentence, and I'm just realizing that I don't know if I'm saying, is it Therese or Therese? It's spelled with TH. But I don't know if it's one of those time thime kind of things. But anyway, from the shadows, still unable to stand, Cliff watched Eris. The whole situation reminded him something out of a fairy tale. But let's rewind the clock one last time. A prelate or bishop of the Milish church fell in love with a halfling woman, and the two eventually had a son. At the time, the boy grew up and took a wife of his own. That couple then had a single child. That child's name is Cliff. At the time of his birth, various factions of the church were locked in a power struggle, and the violence costed both of his parents' lives. In order to save Cliff from the conflict, his grandfather, the prelate, had put him in an orphanage in Militian. The grandfather then proceeded to triumph over his enemies, take the papacy for his own, papacy, that's a word, and he then brought Cliff back to his household. In other words, Cliff Grimoire was the true grandson of Harry Grimoire, his adoptive father, also known as the current Pope of Milis. Although very few, even within the church, knew that. And so because of that, the Cliff knew exactly why the carriage had been attacked. The Miko, who is said to have miraculous powers, was the most powerful tool to a certain bishop, whose faction was currently having conflict with Cliff's grandfather. Cliff had actually met the Miko before, but had no idea why she was all the way out in the forest. He did, however, know the assassins because they were his instructors and teachers. He knew that they were sent to do tasks given to them by his grandfather, and he knew just how powerful they were. He has never been able to beat them once, or even come close to beating them once ever. But then there's Eris, who's just from his point of view, is who's able to just completely sweep them without any troubles. But obviously, in her mind, she's kind of still freaking out about the whole thing. But in reality, the fight was actually a very close call, but not to Cliff. Eris did something that he could never do in a million years. But anyway, back to the present, the two headed back to Militian, and I assume that they were following Therese as she left. I'm not too sure. But anyway, Cliff then found himself staring at Eris's weary face with deep and genuine admiration. This girl was going to be someone one day. But then Cliff proposed to Eris, she shoots him down, and then he realizes that she must be in love with Rudius, her instructor. He asked what he was like, and within minutes, Cliff found himself regretting that question, because Eris, she didn't seem like the talkative type, but oh boy, was she ever interested in talking about Rudius. She kept going on from the plains outside of Militian all the way into the Adventurers Guild, and upon hearing the compliments in the intensity of her feelings for Rudius, Cliff found himself deeply jealous. Cliff said that he's heading home, and almost as though Eris had barely knew him, she's like, oh, alright, bye, later. And she immediately spun around and left. But despite being jealous of Rudius, Cliff was still quite interested in knowing more about him. When he returned back to the headquarters of the Milish church, he was scolded by those who were looking for him. Apparently, a power struggle inside the church had quickly intensified as a result as to what happened to the Miko. The Pope found it to be too dangerous for Cliff to stay in Militian, and so he was sent off to live in a foreign land. As for Eris, she basically forgot about the whole encounter the moment that she returned to the inn and saw Rudius looking miserable on the bed. And that, my friends, is the story of Eris, the Goblin Slayer. And that is the end of Season 1, and so I will see you all in Season 2. But what do you guys think about Eris the Goblin Slayer? I really liked it a lot. It was a very fun episode, fun OVA. It was so much more deep in the light novel as well, and it wasn't even bogged down by a bunch of pointless information which I usually go over. This was just actual, genuine, good stuff that I talked about. What a surprise. But anyway, that is it for this episode review. I will probably maybe see you in Season 2. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a like and subscribe for more Mushoku Tensei content, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.